Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Erika Poethig, and I'm Director of Urban Policy Initiatives at the Urban Institute. And I want to extend a very warm welcome to those of you who've joined us today in this room and those of you who've joined us on the webcast for today's conversation about whether digital credentials can create pathways for opportunity youth into careers in college. I especially want to thank those of you for whom this is your first Live at Urban event, and we do use the hashtag Live at Urban for the purposes of tweeting, so we invite you to participate on Twitter as well as here in the room using that hashtag. Really want to thank you for your interest in the topic and the conversation today. So for those of you who don't know who Urban Institute, we were founded nearly 50 years ago by President Lyndon Baines Johnson at the time of the War on Poverty. And his vision was that the Urban Institute could really help to inform the development of strategies and policies aimed at addressing urban poverty and alleviating the conditions and promoting greater opportunity and mobility. So fast forward to today, we're over 350 researchers dedicated to opening minds, shaping decisions, and offering solutions through economic and social policy research. And I lead a new group at Urban dedicated to providing evidence-based policy advice to local decision makers. And several years ago, we partnered with researchers from our Emerging Beyond High School team in our Center for Income Benefits Policy Center to help advise in the development of a new program of work launched by MacArthur Foundation focused on digital badging as a means to facilitate connected learning, the learning that happens inside the classroom and outside the classroom. So for our team, it was an exciting opportunity to learn about a new and emerging field and to use the tools of data analysis and evaluation to inform the development of a new program and strategy in real time. And in a moment, Leila Toplic from Collective Shift will share more about this model that seeks to promote a city-based ecosystem for learning that includes critical opportunity actors like the local K-12 school system, community colleges and four-year universities, employers and philanthropy, out-of-school providers and chambers of commerce, and of course, city agencies such as parks and recreations and libraries, as well as elected officials such as mayors and school board members. We're excited to have and to host cities that were part of the original cohort of Cities of Learning with us today, as well as cities that have recently been selected to receive support as they develop a strategy to use digital badging to enhance their local learning ecosystems. As part of this larger body of work, we're pleased to contribute to the emerging body of knowledge about digital credentials. And today we released a new paper that Shayne Spaulding will discuss in a moment. Shayne is a senior research associate at the Urban Institute and the leader of the research team that worked on this effort. I'm especially excited that Shayne has brought her considerable knowledge about successful workforce and post-secondary strategies to this emerging field and offers, I think, and I hope you agree, some important recommendations for cracking the nut to bridge the divide and the gap between digital badging and workforce development. Don Baylor, who's a senior member of Urban's Policy Advisory Group, has partnered with Shayne on this project and has provided his local policy expertise to the development of this work. They are a part of a larger team at Urban that I will introduce later in the program. After Shayne's presentation and presentations from Collective Shift and MHA Labs, Don will be moderating our expert panel discussion. And finally, I would like to thank the MacArthur Foundation for their support of this event and inviting us to play a role in the development of this exciting field. I was at MacArthur many moons ago when Connie Yowell and the foundation embarked on this new big bet to understand how digital media influences the way children and young adults learn and to provide insights about how digital media could be a positive force for learning inside and outside the classroom. Those seeds planted more than 10 years ago are bearing fruit with the launch of Cities of Learning, the emergence of LR&G, and increased attention on credentials that are alternative, micro, and digital. It is my singular pleasure to introduce Jen Humke, who's a senior program officer at MacArthur and a friend, as she and I had the opportunity to work together many years ago, who has been a very important thought leader and our main partner in this work. And it's a pure pleasure to have you here today at Urban. Jen, thank you for your leadership and your support.
Thank you, everyone, and hello. I'm Jen Humke with MacArthur, and I've been asked to spend about 3 minutes telling you a little bit about the history of our grant making, and I am going to start from the beginning, but I'm going to go very quickly. So MacArthur has always been invested in the education space since the early 80s, and we started by making grants in support of Chicago public schools. Didn't move the needle. Our board said you need to move on from that. We moved on to a national initiative where we were invested in 3 districts, and within like the 2 to 3 years that we were carrying out that initiative, I think we cycled through about 21 different district leaders. And our board said, okay, again, not moving the needle, you need to take a step back, look to the horizon, and think about how our scarce resources can really make an impact on young people's learning. And so this was in the early 2000s, and it was before Facebook, before Twitter, but social media and digital technologies were changing all kinds of industries, and we were really curious about what kind of an impact they could have on education. So in 2006, we launched the Digital Media and Learning Initiative with a very simple question, which was, how are digital media changing the way young people learn, play, socialize, participate civically, and what could that mean for education? We funded research to better understand how young people learn today. We funded design experiments to think about what learning experiences and learning environments could look like in the digital age. And what emerged from all of that grant making was a new approach to learning that we think is appropriate for the digital age that we're calling connected learning. And connected learning basically argues, it's a very straightforward approach, but it basically argues that there are 3 parts of a young person's life that matter most to them, and when you bring those 3 pieces together, you have the most powerful learning. And that is their peer networks, so learning is fundamentally a social endeavor, the things that they're interested in or want to get better at, so we all know from personal experience that we excel at things that we're interested in, and then pay off in the real world. It needed to pay off for those young people either by getting a job or succeeding in school or doing something in their community that they got recognition for. But one of the challenges is that those 3 pieces are often very fragmented, and it's usually only the young person or a very motivated adult who is able to bring those 3 together, which is why we began to invest in badges. We thought badges could really be a connector for bringing visibility to all learning in a city, connecting in and out of school learning, bringing visibility to important 21st century skills that often are not captured well through traditional transcripts and grades. And I'm already being told I'm running out of time. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and we continue to invest in badges, and in 2012 we had an opportunity to pilot badges at scale in Chicago in partnership with the city of Chicago. We really saw it as an opportunity at a city level, was sort of an ideal ecosystem to make visible, as I was saying, all of the learning that happens in a city, to really expand the learning ecosystem beyond schools, to include all of the learning in the out-of-school space. And I think we also recognized, and the city recognized, that although schools are always going to be the most important node on a young person's learning, that it's really important to align city resources and marshal city resources in a way to best serve the needs of young people, ensure that all young people have access to the resources and learning opportunities to improve their lives. We continued to pilot that in Chicago. A number of other cities joined, including Dallas and Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. That work proved to be incredibly promising, and as a result, last year, MacArthur provided seed funding for a new organization called Collective Shift that is taking the Cities of Learning work to the next level. And Leila is going to share with you a little bit more about that work. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Shayne Spaulding. I'm a senior research associate here at the Urban Institute. First, I'm going to talk about the paper that came out today on this topic, and I first want to acknowledge my co-author, Martha Johnson, who's in the audience today. As Erika described and Jen described, we've been working with MacArthur on this effort for almost 2 years, and part of the idea was to bring our experience in workforce development to this initiative, our experience, our knowledge about the research to this initiative. And so in this paper, we try to do just that. We identify lessons learned from the workforce development field and apply these lessons to programs like the ones that Jen described. They're working on trying to improve outcomes for youth using digital badges. We also in the paper identify some opportunities for using digital badging in workforce development and post-secondary education. Before talking about these lessons, I just want to say a few words about the challenges that youth face in the labor market. We know that youth, especially youth of color and low-income youth, face numerous challenges in the labor market. In addition to persistent discrimination, youth face high rates of unemployment, which make it difficult to build early work experience. There are large numbers of youth who are disconnected from school and work. We see low college completion rates, which makes it difficult for youth to earn the credentials that employers value. And even for those who they're often complete school. They're often not in programs that reflect the labor market or employer demand. Finally, we believe that employers value the skills built through extracurricular experiences, but often low-income youth don't have equal access to these kinds of opportunities. On the employer side, and we know there's debate about the skills gap, but employers say they have difficulty finding people with the skills they need. It may be that there's not enough job seekers with those skills, but also there's literature that suggests that credentials and resumes do a poor job of communicating to employers what skills young people have. It also may be that screening and hiring processes are not very efficient in identifying people with the appropriate skills. So in this context, digital badges have been put forth as a way of addressing some of these challenges. So what are digital badges? Just briefly, for those of you who don't know, they are representations of achievement that can be shared online and include links to additional information about the learning associated with the badge. And you will hear more about that in a little bit. There's not very much evidence to date on the use of digital badges in the labor market, which is why we're looking to the workforce development literature to try to see if there are some lessons there. A lot of the research to date funded by the MacArthur Foundation has focused on learning outcomes and things like motivation, increased access to learning opportunities, but we haven't really had the chance to look at the use of badges in the labor market. So there's more research needed, but today I'm going to talk about 5 key lessons from workforce development. So I think the most important thing is that the need to engage employers in the work and make sure that badges have value and are recognized. So in workforce development, we've increasingly come to realize the importance of engaging employers and designing programs that are responsive to their needs. I think we used to follow what some have called the train and pray approach, right? You train people and hope that they can get a job. And I also think there's an increased recognition of the need to demonstrate the value proposition to employers, so to speak the language of business and show that what you're doing has value to them. So drawing on these lessons from workforce development, I think programs working to develop digital currency for digital badges can market the badges to employers in a way that they understand and conveys their value, to engage employers in the design and delivery of the learning programs, and to use these relationships to ensure that what young people are learning is preparing them for success in the labor market. I think there are lots of resources out there to tap into. There's labor market information, which the workforce system relies on often, occupational profiles, all of this can be useful. I think there's also a lot happening in the workforce development space. For example, sectoral employment initiatives I think is a real opportunity in sectoral employment initiatives, which have shown to be an effective strategy for bridging the gap between employers and job seekers, making sure programs are meeting employer needs. In these initiatives, groups of employers and training providers, education providers come together to try to meet the skills needs in a region. So this gets me to my second recommendation. So engage employers, that's the main one. The second recommendation, I think, is that there are these many efforts going on around the country. There are the sectoral initiatives, but also in higher education, we see a lot happening in terms of trying to implement innovative strategies to address low college completion rates and to make programs more accessible and meet the needs of students. I think those implementing digital badging efforts should think to tap into these efforts. So I think there are opportunities for pilots. I think many of these institutions engaged in efforts and the employers engaged in these efforts are going to be likely more receptive to digital badges as a concept. And I think then you can start to build the evidence for digital badges. I think even in some of these initiatives, like prior learning assessment and competency-based education, there may be structures in place to make it easier to implement digital badges. My third point is that in developing these pilots and partnerships, I think it's important to think about where badges really have the opportunity to add value. I will mention there are many, I think, areas where badges could add value. I'm just going to mention two today. So employers consistently note the importance of soft skills in entry-level employees. We know that because the assessment of soft skills can be so subjective, it is often used to mask discrimination on the part of employers. But there are key characteristics that fall in this bucket of soft skills that employers look for. Persistence, the ability to work in teams or to communicate effectively. And these are really important and they're very hard to demonstrate. So I think there's a possibility, and it's left to be seen, but that digital badges can provide a means for giving evidence of soft skills beyond the keywords that people put in a resume. That's how it's done often now. So evidence could link, in a resume, evidence could link to videos, work products, or reviews by staff or peers that would provide evidence of soft skills. I think another area of opportunity is in work experience programs, particularly summer youth employment programs. We know there's high rates of unemployment, as I discussed earlier, and there's a big focus right now on trying to give youth some early work experience. Many of these programs have not shown to be very effective in terms of employment. They help with other outcomes, but they haven't been that successful in terms of employment beyond the summer of participation in a program. So thinking about how digital badges could help strengthen those programs by sort of marking what are the key skills people need to know, and then also giving youth the chance to document those skills for future jobs. So as I'm recommending and piloting all these efforts and attaching badges to existing programs, I'm also wary of the possibility of badge proliferation. As I said earlier, there is a lot going on right now in the education space. It is already confusing, right? Employers can't navigate it. Students have a hard time navigating it. And I think as an example of this, I was at a meeting and I was sitting with some HR executives and I was talking to them about badges and they looked worried and they said, please don't give us one more thing we have to start understanding. We have to sort through. We receive thousands of applications. So I keep that in mind. For this reason, I think it is important that badges be rigorous, they be meaningful, and I think we want to think carefully about having badges everywhere for everything, because I think that's a sure path to having employers not recognize them. My fifth recommendation is not to have badges only used for those who have not succeeded in traditional education programs. They can't be used just as second chance credentials. We know from evidence of the GED test and other workforce readiness credentials that have been piloted that there's a risk of stigma When people see a badge, and if it's only for someone that's gone on a certain path, then it just might signal to the employers that someone's not ready. So I sort of, if there's a strategy to have badges incorporated in a broader set of educational programs, I think there is a greater opportunity for success. In conclusion, I think badges do offer lots of opportunity, and more evidence is needed for their use as a workforce development strategy. So I hope that we continue to build that evidence through rigorous evaluation. And so that is my conclusion. And I'm going to turn it over to our next speakers, who will talk about how they're working to use digital badges to help youth in the labor market. So Leila Toplic will speak from LRNG. This is a new effort that's been described that aims to close the opportunity gap and transform how young people access and experience learning. She oversees engagement with cities, nonprofits, corporations, educators, and policymakers. She will be followed by Leslie Baylor, who's the founder of MHA Labs, a Chicago-based organization that focuses on identifying, building, and translating 21st century skills of young people towards economic success. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayne, Erika, Dawn, and Christine for bringing us all together here today. It's an honor to be joining such an esteemed group of people and having a conversation about something that we care so much about at LRNG. In fact, at LRNG, we believe that badges, digital badges, have a potential to be a game changer in how we value and recognize learning and digital skills, and how we connect skills to also opportunities. But changing the game is never a simple or straightforward task. To understand also what needs to happen in order for us to change the game, we need to know what we're up against. So Shayne mentioned a little bit about this, but I want to spend a minute talking about the kind of the broader context in which we operate. And we all know that we live in this time of incredible learning abundance. At the same time, we have incredible inequality because learning in the 21st century is still fragmented and disconnected. And as a result, 60% of high school students are not engaged in school, and 20% of teens are dropping out of school before they graduate. That amounts to 7 million young people in the US that are neither in school nor employed. And what's more, there's a sharp divide emerging between those who have access to 21st century skills and opportunities and those who do not. Wealthy families spend 6 to 7 times as much on out-of-school enrichment, which research shows are some of the key predictors of career and post-secondary success. At the same time, we're expecting our young people to be the leaders of the 21st century. But the way in which they learn is really designed for the 20th century. The learning still happens at a particular time of day, in a particular building, in a particular way. And learning, as it was mentioned in the Urban Institute research brief, is still disconnected from the real world opportunities. And as a result, 40% of the US companies cannot find qualified workers, and employers, like companies like Microsoft, where I used to lead talent development, spend more on training their workers than universities and governments combined. So lost opportunity for the current cohort of nearly 7 million young people ages 16 through 24 is estimated at $4.75 trillion in social burden over their lifetime. So we must ask, how do we make learning opportunities and experiences here we go. How do we make learning opportunities and experiences visible, accessible, and ladder up to something for all young people? At LRNG, we're specifically working to transform how young people access and experience learning and the paths that they can take to post-secondary and career success. As Jen noted, LRNG is based on about a decade worth of research in connected learning and about 3 years of piloting of citizen learning. And research tells us that what young people need is inspiration, guidance, access. And this is something that no one institution can provide alone. So we're working with city leaders, with businesses, with community institutions like museums and libraries, with nonprofits, to network all the learning resources and experiences, both on the local community levels as well as the national level, and ultimately make this ecosystem of learning open and inviting to all youth. And I do want to take a moment to take you through what that really looks like. First, we're creating a set of tools that can capture learning experiences wherever they happen, whether they're online, in programs across the cities. What you're seeing here is 2 examples, one of the digital online experience, the other one of the local experience in a city. Second, we need to make these experiences discoverable by all youth as they explore their interests and passions. And we do that in 2 ways. So again, research shows that equitable, engaging, and employable learning begins with where youth are in their communities. In LRNG cities like DC, Dallas, Chicago, Pittsburgh, as well as 8 new cities that joined us earlier this year, and some of them are here in the room with us. Also, as highlighted in Urban Institute's research brief, it's important to make these learning experiences broadly available. And we do that through our national platform. So what you're seeing here is just a snapshot of what a national discovery feed looks like, and an example from City of Chicago. Third, we do need to make learning count wherever it happens. For young people, learning is not something that they do at a particular time of day. They're living it. It's something that they live, and we need to make sure the badges can help us make everywhere, all the time learning possible. And the badges, specifically with the data and the proof of work they contain, are also a critical tool for breaking through some of the institutional barriers that lock too many young people out of pursuing the traditional paths to success, or even pursuing their interests. Badges are specifically verifiable, they're owned by the learner, and they're also shareable. So what's interesting is that learners can share these badges on LinkedIn, social media networks, and also include them on their resumes. And what's more, the badges also provide a more meaningful way to communicate young person's qualifications, making it easier for youth to share both soft skills and hard skills, and for employers to find workers with appropriate skill set. And then last, these learning experiences and moments of recognition and feedback, like badges, need to be organized into narratives, into themes that are compelling and meaningful to all youth, and that are also aligned with the labor market needs. We call these playlists. Playlists contain badges. As Shayne mentioned, it's important to co-design these learning experiences with employers, and to also make these opportunities available to youth to demonstrate their skills. So LRNG is working with a number of corporate partners and program partners like Electronic Arts, GAP, Fossil, We.org, to design a set of playlists that connect young people's passions to purpose, and ultimately enable them through earning of the badges to unlock these real-world opportunities like summer jobs or internships. And examples of the playlist include GAP's career readiness playlist, financial literacy, civic tech, game design, and many others. And I do want to mention that also LRNG cities and program partners are connecting and networking their learning resources on a local level, making these experiences and badges available to all youth. So In closing, I do want to note that this is just the beginning, and developing a fully functional badging ecosystem that benefits all youth will take a lot of and long-term effort. It really requires a collaborative commitment and resources by all of us, by employers, by nonprofits, schools, and city officials. And let's work together to provide digital badges that are interoperable, that are broadly valued, and ultimately are enabling us to address equity, engagement, and employability issues for all youth. Thank you very much.
I'm okay, actually. I'll just stand up here. I like to move around, so I'm a teacher by nature, so I just want to, so I'm just going to pre-warn you, I am a total adamant believer in this work and believer in LRNG, and I've taken it upon myself today to spend my 5 minutes converting as many of you as possible into believers. So I brought this because we're in DC, but I want us to take us back to, like, how many of you still want to live in a country where we believe that asking the hard questions and pursuing the hard opportunities and challenging equity and challenging things are still part of our core vision as a country, right? How many of you know that it takes an incredible amount of hard work, but it takes movements of people, it takes folks coming together, it takes a big, audacious challenge, right? So I'm gonna throw out to you today is that we are literally deciding to unpack the entire future of how we deliver learning, how we deliver education, how we hire, how we communicate, how we value people. I cannot think of any greater gift that we could all enter into together. So what I use this picture to as an inspiration for me is that the idea of what badging can do by unlocking competency, by making it transparent, to me continues this dream that we would live in a country where you could be judged by the content of your character and not by your race only, not by your class only, and not by your credential only, but being able to dig into this beautiful content that is not judged by everyone else, but is judged by you and your organizations and throwing, and is able to unlock opportunities. So that's kind of, I wanted just to show you why we're so excited about this work. On a practical level, so what I like about your presentation is it really showed we are literally unpacking competency down to its root cause, its root origin, in the context of when it happened. So I want to throw this out. There are 64 million entrants to the workforce. So I'm saying up until 29, now that with the whole millennial generation and extended adolescence, I'm kind of pushing it out. That's 64 million people. So we talk about the skills gap. It is not possible that 64 million people became unskilled in the last 3 years, right? Just when the rhetoric started. In the top 100 companies to work for in America, there are only 100,000 jobs opening. So this idea is that we keep talking about not enough workers, talking about the skills gap. We have 64 million people to choose from. It is not possible they are not skilled. One of the big issues is that they have no idea how skilled they are. So we have been training all across the country down to the grassroots level of a classroom to say, do your young people actually know how skilled they are? Even in the worst possible classroom, you are actually learning skills, right? So if all you're doing is worksheets, you are learning following rules and directions, right? I go into classrooms all the time and I'm like, list me 3 skills that you got in the last 12 years of your education, and people are blind to that. If you don't know how skilled you are, you can't enter into the workforce, the level of audaciousness and competency to sell yourself in an interview, to even understand if you match those jobs. So the first part about, I think, badging is, I now know exactly how skilled I am. I know how to pursue my own dreams, my own expectations, my life opportunity. We've also been going around the country saying, what other things would happen besides economic development if 64 million people knew how skilled they are? We literally have young people and teachers saying it would end segregation, it would end unemployment, it would decrease violence. So this skill set that we're talking about, this 21st century skills, is not just about powering our economy, it's about powering our society. Next is, and this number might be inaccurate, this is like latest reports, about 8.5 million companies, and I did this at companies hiring 50 or more employees. So we know in a very small company, so I'm not trying to fudge the numbers. What if 8.5 million companies could go to a website like LRNG and literally hunt for exact set of competencies you have and when you did them, right? So imagine you're looking for, I need a STEM enthusiast, someone who's constantly pushing the limits, and LRNG is like, wow, this kid has participated in 42 STEM programs since the age of 5, right? That transforms the way we think about headhunting and recruiting, right? It's not just your degree, it's I can know exactly what you did. Imagine in a classroom, it's like, I need someone who just knows ratios. You can't get that right now. But with badging, you can unpack an entire course curriculum, badge each content area, and I could headhunt for that. So this idea of if every single person knew how skilled they are, and every single employer and every single college could find out how skilled you are, imagine just the revolutionary miracles that could happen to the workforce. So when I think about this movement, and I've actually never been part of a movement that was more skeptical than the badges movement. I don't know why. From the day I'm like, this is the best thing that ever happened to the economy and to young people, and there's so much skepticism. So I just want you to bring it down to size, which is a little competency packet. For those of you nerds, remember the data packets that moved all the data around, right? So imagine if there's millions of little packets on how well you performed since the day you were born until the day you enter the market that was accessible and searchable. Imagine the algorithms we could write on that. Imagine the innovation you could write on that. So I'm just super excited about that. So one, yeah, it all sounds really fancy. We did it. We got our entire city in less than a year, and now we have Minneapolis, DC, all coming together to say, we are going to buy into this, we're gonna pick a common set of competencies, and we're gonna double down, and we're gonna literally record a competency from parents to 3-year-olds all the way through our entire workforce development system. And so from researchers to the government, we literally all came together and said, this issue is too big for us to sit back on. But also 21st century skills, everyone has a different definition of it. We've got to take a stake in the ground and just do it. So we all decided, if it looks good enough, we're just going to move on and we're going to start doing the work versus debating the taxonomy. So we have a set of 6 building blocks. There's 35 really pragmatic, practical skills. They're written intentionally. We did 5 years of research to be a learning objective. It can sit on a job description. It can sit on a 4th grade lesson plan. It can also actually serve as an assessment item. So we have thousands of people assessing these skills every day in the context of their program. But then employers were like, ooh, this language is kind of bulky. So we did our research, and we've been literally having thousands of employers actually rate actual youth employees. So we didn't want to bring them in a room and saying, what do you think is important? They all say verbal communication. After 5 years of doing statistical data, we cannot get verbal communication to show up as a predictor of the job you do. Let's be honest, about 90% of jobs don't require you to have perfect articulation on the job. We have employers say verbal communication. I was like, your employees are not allowed to talk on the job. Why are you screening for verbal communication? So actually, socially inept people might actually be a better market advantage. They were like, we never thought about it that way. And so this idea is we broke it down to 12 skills. So we have literally 12 items that predict 80% of entry-level job performance. We now have thousands of employers actually working on these skills, doubling down. We're able to screen employees. We have a hard stop. We've gotten thousands and thousands of people to actually tag their skills and competencies. So from teachers to out of school time to employers to job descriptions, giving very specific skill profiles. We've done it at the scale of thousands, so it's doable. And then we literally are sitting on 22,000 work badges right now, just waiting to be plugged into LRNG to actually make transactions. We are using this to the 100,000 Opportunities Project. So we are literally ready to make this dream come true if you all become open and less skeptical and excited about it too.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Baylor, Senior Associate with the Policy Advisory Group at the Urban Institute. My task here is to moderate our esteemed panel. And before we kind of get into the meat of it, obviously we heard a lot of interesting comments, research, evidence prior to this, and we'll dig into that. But first, to my immediate left is Jamai Blivin. Jamai is founder and CEO of Innovate Educate, a nonprofit she started in 2009 with a vision for an industry-led board focused on education and workforce strategies to address the significant gaps between supply and demand in both the education and workforce space. Deborah Carroll is director of the Washington, D.C. Department of Employment Services and oversees the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program, among other really important citywide workforce initiatives. David Leeser is Senior Manager of Strategic Initiatives for IBM's Training and Skills Program. Mr. Leeser developed IBM's first cloud-based learning solution and is the program developer for IBM's new Open Badge program, a leading-edge program to attract, engage, and progress talent. And you want to talk about an evangelist for this work. Look forward to hearing him more from him later. And then Julian Alsid at the far end is Chief Workforce Strategist at College for America and is a nationally recognized expert in promoting effective practical solutions for implementing career pathway initiatives. And a reminder to our audience that is tuning in via web stream, there is the opportunity to submit questions for our Q&A, which will begin about a half an hour from now. And you can submit those questions online to events@urban.org. That is events@urban.org. So before I kind of launch in and kind of quiz our panelists here, just want to kind of reset kind of where we are. I think a few of the interesting things that I heard, some of the things that are kind of impetus to this work, the large number of youth that are disconnected from school and the workplace, approximately 7 million, no matter kind of how you cut it. And we do see this play out along racial and ethnic lines, with African American youth having an unemployment rate of about 34% and Latino youth having an unemployment rate of about 22%. And we did hear Leslie talk about kind of how transformational this effort could be, but we also heard about Leila talking about how these experiential observations can really kind of move the needle and engage youth. And I think Jen Humke from the MacArthur Foundation talked about really the importance of engaging youth where they are. I think that's a really important concept to think about as we move forward, that we can't really just throw things and expect youth to absorb them. There has to be a lot of interaction. I think one of the things that we're seeing is a lot more youth design and youth involvement in this work. And once again, to kind of recap some of the major recommendations from Shayne Spaulding's research paper about the importance of engaging employers in the design and delivery, building on existing frameworks and policies and programs, and making sure that we market digital badges effectively by emphasizing what the employer gets from this new innovation. So I will ask Jamai first. Your work in many ways is informed by what many kind of call a crisis with regard to opportunity youth in this country. Can you describe how your employer-involved programs are addressing this issue?
Yes, and excuse me, my voice is bad today, so it may not be perfect. So our whole focus is shifting the employer piece to competencies, which is badging. Credentials, competencies, badging. So we're in 7 cities working specifically on an employer-led model, working with hundreds of employers to really try to shift their hiring practice. Our work is not just focused on opportunity youth. We are funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and we have a big opportunity youth initiative on the ground right now in Albuquerque. It's always a demand supply issue. Either we have too many employers and not enough youth looking for jobs, or too many youth and not enough employers. Right now we have over 1,000 job openings for a big, huge hiring fair we're doing in Albuquerque, but we don't have enough youth wanting to go to work. So it's like always trying to push that. So overall, all of our work is around getting the employer to recognize new credentials, drop the 4-year degree, drop the years of experience. And those two things are 90% of the barriers right now for all young people, experience and degree. So that's what we're doing. I could talk about it all day long because that's my passion, but it's employer-led, and my biggest concern about all of this is that the supply side is doing all the badging, and the employer side they're the hardest people to move.
That's really good, and we'll come back to, I think, to some of those issues a little bit later on, but I want to move to Ms. Carroll next. As a city official responsible for connecting youth to employment, how do these challenges play out on the local level in DC is the first question, and how are you thinking about the role of digital badges in one of your largest programs, that is summer youth employment?
Well, the issue of employment in DC in particular, I use an analogy all the time. It's a square peg in a round hole. We have a large number of residents that are lower skilled or lower credentialed competing for the same jobs. And that's the case in the regional economy as well. And so we have to find ways to distinguish the youth and others that are looking for work from the rest of the workforce that they're competing with. And I think that digital badging in particular is one tool that can be used to demonstrate to employers the particular skill sets that they have beyond what's written on a piece of paper. I think the biggest challenge relating to that is getting the employer buy-in. I do agree. And we also have to demonstrate for the youth, or at least enable them to be able to market the badges and show, even make the employers understand why it's important that they've earned these badges and what skills those, even having them demonstrate. A good example is, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. I use that all the time, right? It's a whole simple way of doing badges and earning certain credentials along the way. And each badge that a Boy Scout earns, all the way up to Eagle Scout, that demonstrates to any employer that they've achieved certain things. And so it's essentially getting that similar analogy in the workforce context, so that an employer knows that if they earn certain badges, maybe from certain particular companies or particular schools, that comes with a package of skill sets that set them aside from everyone else.
So just to follow up on this, I mean, DC has one of the larger summer youth employment programs, especially for a city of its size. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the importance of summer youth employment in the DC context, and what the vision potentially for digital badges could be?
Sure. So right now our summer youth employment program is probably the largest per capita in the nation. And it was born out of the premise that we wanted to create opportunities for youth and begin to build career exploration as well as career pathways. One of the largest initiatives that we're working on right now is expanding to the 22 to 24-year-olds to enable older youth, right, to have that gateway into the workforce. And in part because we do have a fairly large disconnected youth population up to that age. So we're now entering our foray of digital badging as a way to earn competencies during the summer, and over time expand it to the entire population. For the younger youth, the 14 and 15-year-olds, it might be a set of skills that we would want to demonstrate throughout the summer, and then likewise the older youth would earn badges throughout their experience. So this will be our first attempt using a small scale. We're watching Chicago very closely, to see how it's rolled out. But the idea being that this will be our opportunity for us to introduce it to employers on a very small scale, and likewise get the youth involved in the badging community.
Great. So I'm going to move on to David on down the line. I think David plays an interesting kind of role in this ecosystem, both on the employer side, but also as really kind of a content provider in many ways. And you've been involved with designing digital badge architecture in your role at IBM. Can you walk us through your platform and how digital badges became somewhat of a game changer for y'all?
Well, technology is changing so quickly that people are having a hard time keeping up. We used to release our technology products every 18 months. About 2 years ago, we shifted to about a 6-month cycle. But now with cloud and mobile, it's so disrupted that technology is changing every 60 days. We're releasing new products every 60 days. So the question is, how does anybody keep up at that pace with a certification or any other type of professional credential? And how do you show that you have the most current liquid skills? And so we started looking at our certification program, saying, what can we do about those? And should they be relegated to something that has a shelf life of 24 months? And how can we start to provide real valuable credentials for the companies that IBM works for? So we launched the IBM Open Badge program last year, and the idea was to bring in more people that are interested in big data development at any level, high school level, graduate level, an upskilling type of level. We have an online university called Big Data University. So you can write down bigdatauniversity.com since I'm evangelizing. But anybody can go up to bigdatauniversity.com right now, whether you're in high school, wherever you're at, and earn an IBM badge. You can go up there and take the basics of big data fundamentals or Hadoop fundamentals. Those are courses that are designed to get you on the leaderboard, get you interested in understanding what big data is about, and then go on to the next level and then say, well, now I want to be a little more sophisticated. All the courses are free at Big Data University. You can earn this badge, and then you can instantly push it out to LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And what we're finding is it is a huge game changer for IBM because we have, like a lot of people have, online universities that don't get a lot of traction, or they have a big dropout rate. Or the dropout rate on Big Data University is very high. We found that after we introduced badges, we increased the completion rate on the courses by 694%. So it's huge, the number of people that said, I'm going to stick with this because I want that IBM badge. It's a little mini Harvard degree. So we also increased the Me Too effect, 125% people coming in off of social media to the site. But the most rewarding part of it, and this is the part that we all need more evidence on, is how it's connecting to jobs. And we're starting to get case studies and testimonials now from people who have earned badges. They pushed them out to LinkedIn. By the way, LinkedIn says that LinkedIn profiles that have badges or digital certification credentials get 6 times more views than those that don't. So anybody that is looking for a job, it's a great way to, boost your visibility. But we're finding that people are starting to send us letters that they're getting jobs. People that have been out of the workforce or graduated from high school or have just graduated from college, they want to show that they have these liquid current skills. They're earning 3 or 4 badges at Big Data University or one of our other type of activities, and they're getting jobs. We have people that have said they tried getting a job, couldn't get it. They added that digital IBM emblem to it, and they got an interview. So I just want to give a push for all that data. If you're looking for that data, if you just Google SlideShare IBM badge, SlideShare IBM badge, you're going to find the whole case study with all the data points that show the value to IBM for badges.
Great. So I think David provides a really great example about how digital badging has increased the pipeline for qualified employees, but also giving them kind of some additional exposure. And I think potentially that's some ways to be expected from a rapidly changing technical skills in the IT space. And really want Julian to weigh in on the challenges that you see. Also some of the things that you're hearing from employers, but the challenges that you see with regard to digital badges really kind of taking hold in other sectors and industries.
Well, and so just a little bit of background.
Sure.
So College for America is a nonprofit college. We're part of Southern New Hampshire University. That's a competency-based model. So our students advance not based on how many classes they've taken and credits earned, but on demonstrated mastery of competencies. And so the way we build our curriculum is by understanding competencies that are in demand in key industries and occupations, and then working with industry experts, subject matter experts and practitioners, bringing them together with our academic design team to build these projects. So we haven't yet gotten into badging per se, but in a sense what we do is sort of a badging form of higher ed. And I think for me, the big issue coming at it from the workforce perspective and really reflecting, Shayne, the first recommendation in the report is that this has to be driven by demand. I mean, I love the IBM example. And my fear and my concern is that there's a lot of badges being made by groups that aren't driven by demand. And so my concern is that employers may not recognize these and they may not have currency in the marketplace. Clearly having that little IBM tag is a big deal. People know IBM, and you can now influence your suppliers. That's a really big deal. So that's what we'd like to see a lot more of.
Sure. So I think, Jamai, you've I think, been fairly vocal about a couple of things, right? One is this over-reliance on this 4-year college degree, and the other one being about badges that relay skills that are not necessarily specific to a particular industry per se, but could be kind of cross-sectoral. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those.
Right. So the work we're doing, we're right now working in retail, hospitality, IT, and manufacturing. We know that close to 80% of the core competencies that employers are looking for are cross-sector. So critical thinking is critical thinking is critical thinking is critical thinking. Now, it could be a little different because if you're a technician, you've got to think a little differently than if you're a customer service at Walmart. but we are developing a soft skills competency-based assessment that will measure these core skills across sectors. Again, I could say it a million times, if the employer doesn't recognize it, it's all for naught, because they still go back to the only thing that they believe is justifiable, which is experience in a 4-year degree. I have 4 kids in college, 2 graduating, both of them are looking for jobs, can't get one, the degree is not working, unless you're an engineer or a medical or whatever. So, people that are even getting the degree are still having trouble finding the job. So we do believe that these are core skills across sector. Employers have said, like Leslie said, they're going to call them something different, but we know it's critical thinking, teamwork, communication, collaboration, whatever they want to call them. As long as you can measure them and validate that they're measurable, which we know these are teachable, measurable skills. So we also know that College for America and others have validated competency-based curriculum that can teach those skills. So what we're trying to do is match the curriculum and the validated training, because we've got a problem that there may be a lot of training, but we don't know that it works. So we're trying to match validated training with validated skills and then do ROI studies with the employers to show that it actually worked. That's the only way to get the employer to shift, in our opinion.
Yep.
So.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page when it comes to soft skills, and I think there's a pretty good definition in the research paper. Non-cognitive skills, behaviors, and attributes valuable in the workforce, things like persistence, adaptability, self-discipline in this working in teams. I'm going to turn to David and to Deborah. From the employer perspective, what is this debate? What do you hear about soft skills, and what is the latest about how you go about identifying whether an applicant has these types of important skills?
I think it's a really good point, and it's very, very important. And back to the idea of the technical skills where I'm at. Incidentally, a lot of the job applications at IBM or the job openings at IBM don't require a college degree anymore.
Right, you guys have done a great job there.
It really is irrelevant. Yeah. It's the skills. I mean, Larry Ellison didn't get a college degree, right? And he did fine. But I think you bring up a very, very good point. A couple years ago, when we started looking for coders, we looked for programmers. We expected to hire code monkeys, basically, that sit in a room and eat munchies and code, right? But if you look at the new jobs out there right now, and at IBM and the other company, they're really hybrid. And we're looking for skills that are communication skills, marketing skills, collaboration skills. People need to know how to collaborate. They need to know how to present themselves, and they need to have cognitive skills. So there are a lot of skills that they need to have in addition to, again, those liquid skills. And so I think that there's really an opportunity there to define, and catalog all of those different skills, because there are people that are within reach of high-paying technical jobs, and they don't even know it. They have those marketing skills, those communication, those collaborative skills. And if we can just take them to a code school or something that you're doing or someplace else, they're 6 weeks away from getting a higher paying job, that may open their horizons to things that they never even thought were possible. So I think we have to really start to catalog all those skills, find a way to assess those skills, and then look for the gap between that and the job opening, and then fill it with training.
So Deborah, you're dealing with all types of employers and all types of industries, and we know that this issue of soft skills does come up for you, and kind of curious to know what you kind of hope to get out of digital badges when it comes to soft skills, and if you have any kind of wisdom when it comes to that.
So So soft skills in many ways is a term, it's very amorphous, right? It means different things to different employers. And oftentimes is so undefined that a client doesn't know what they're missing. They don't understand. They've done all the right things, right? They went to school, they took the class, they passed it, they have their certification, they went and had maybe a work experience opportunity. They've done all the things that we've asked them to do, and they still haven't quite gotten that job. And so it makes it very hard in order to quantify for someone, well, maybe you need to improve these areas when they're so subjective. What the badging, I'm hoping will do is take some of that subjectivity out. And show for an employer, they can look at the metadata behind the badge to see what it was that individual did to demonstrate that particular skill. And so it is going to be an education process for employers, but I do think it goes a long way. And much of the work that I'm hearing is happening across the country. It's in it's project-based. So you're working in teams. You're demonstrating the skills real time. Somebody might be recording you or taking a picture of the final product, whatever it might be. It's showing those critical thinking skills in real time. It's showing the collaboration skills in real time. It's looking at how people make decisions, right, and situational judgment. So that employers, when they're viewing the metadata behind it, they have a much more confidence, right, that person is going to fit in their workplace.
Yep.
And so, on the flip side, the youth also have the opportunity to gain the confidence that they need because they're also seeing it themselves. And so they're able to communicate those skills in a way that's very real and very meaningful. And they can encourage the employer to look at the badge and look behind the badge to see what they've done. And so they then learn how to market their own badges, the ones that they've earned. And I think there's a good synergy there that we, once tapped fully, I think will really take away some of the barriers that many of our residents have to getting employment.
So I'm going to turn to Julian real quickly, but to a reminder for folks that are in the audience, we will be transitioning to our Q&A in about 10 minutes, a little less, and to our folks tuning in via webcast, and another reminder to submit your questions to events@urban.org. Julian, are soft skills badgeable, and if so, how?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they are. Well, it's great hearing you talk about your, kind of how you pull together. It's basically you're describing what we do. So we don't separate soft skills from hard skills in our program. So our projects, again, we're project-based learning approach. It's like real life. So we have a project around active learning, I think in one of our in our associates program, where a student has to learn about active learning. It's kind of it's a whole world of research around that. They have to develop some kind of a protocol to interview someone. They then interview them and practice the skills they learned and what they read. They're videotaped doing the interview. And then an expert reviews their work. So, that's not unlike something they might do on the job. But in that project, they're not just learning active learning. They're also checking off boxes around writing and analysis and communications and so on. So, I could see a project like ours, which might be hitting on several competencies, having several badges embedded within.
So when Urban embarked upon this work, we actually visited cities, and I think we learned a couple things, and I'll just lay out a few of them. One is that cities and organizations are able to issue badges on a fairly large scale. Working out the technology, it does exist, that capacity. And this effort does seem to require a lot of partners, right? You've got school districts, you've got workforce development entities, you've got employers, you've actually got city agencies, after school partners. And in some places, badge design is happening a little bit differently. So to some extent, there is a 1,000 badges bloom approach that we kind of have going on a little bit. How sustainable is it for badge architecture or content to vary according to the regional flavor? Or should we accept some variability given that labor markets are primarily local or regional? I guess I'll start with you, Jamai.
Yeah, I think all of our work is regional, but I do think that it all rolls up into national. So the demand needs may be different in a city, but I don't think the skills are different. So I wish that LRNG was up and running by May 19th so we could badge the 500 kids that we have coming to find jobs. Because if anybody knows how to do that, we're going to badge these kids with all of their different skills they've gone through: cognitive training, non-cognitive training, customer service training, etc. But I do think that there is great risk to this if it doesn't roll up somewhere. And there's even more risk if the employers don't get the talent they want and they've hired someone with a badge that doesn't have the skill. So to me, it's a very important initiative, and we're very excited about the work happening. There's no better time than now for this to be happening. but there's risk that the employers will get burned, and then we're back 3 years ago.
So David, IBM's a global company, right? So what
Well, my viewpoint on it is that we shouldn't insist on badges being legally defensible, psychometrically sound. They're not meaning certifications, right? So I think we're at the stage right now where we have to see where this thing goes. And I think if we try to limit it at this point, we limit the enormous possibilities for social media that we have right now. That proliferation, I think, is useful. But at IBM, one thing that we've done and we've insisted upon with our badges is complete transparency on the badge. So you not only can go into the badge, see the name of the badge, the skills tags, the description, but we require that there's a link to evidence in the badge. So an employer can look at that, and the badge can't say that it's a PhD in data science and it's that intro to big data fundamentals course that you just took. But they can go all the way through. They can go all the way through and they can see the evidence of what actually was achieved, what was learned, what did it take to earn that badge. And then they can make their own decision if that's a person that can lead the team or a person that can be on the team at a junior level. I mean, ultimately, I want entry-level badges because I want that leaderboard gamification element where people come back. At IBM, the average person's coming back for 3 badges now. So they're starting at just that intro level, which is easy, but it's a lot harder to get that 3rd badge. But once they get on the leaderboard, they realize the benefits and the value, and they're like, well, I've already read the first chapter. I'm going to finish this thing, and I'm going to see if I can get a job.
Julie, you have any insight on
No, it's funny, as we're talking, I'm thinking, a few years back, I was very actively involved in New York City in the .com boom, like the education side, and everyone and their sister had a web development program. And, in reality, only a few, first of all, the market became really saturated, but that's one story. Hopefully we can solve that problem and fill all the jobs with qualified young people. But for me, the real lesson was, and I still think of it to this day, that I think there were a lot of groups out there that were developing web developers that had no connection to industry, that didn't have the contacts, whose programs were not driven by or validated by industry. And I'm a little wary about the 1,000 flowers blooming approach. I mean, we're talking about youth who are up against big barriers to begin with. So I do think in the end, the cream will rise to the top, so to speak. And again, we'll see who gets jobs out of this, and that's really ultimately, to me, what matters the most, or who can advance their education. So where do these badges carry value?
Great. So Deborah, we'll give you the last word as a kind of a local person. Are you more or less looking inward, or is there some part of what you're doing that needs to be connected to kind of a larger national platform?
No, I absolutely think it needs to be connected for a number of reasons. I think that one of the benefits of badging is also getting youth interested in learning beyond the workforce development space. I think it's a very useful tool, particularly for disconnected youth, to get reconnected, where they can be in their safe space, they can explore the badges that are currently in the system, and learn about other things that they might not otherwise be exposed to, but for that interaction. So we're looking at this not only from the workforce development context, but also how it can benefit in learning. And if they do that, their workforce development prospects become even greater because they're self-directed, they're showing other skills even beyond what the badge would demonstrate. And then the other thing is that in the district we have some very large national companies, and then we have very small companies. We're actually largely comprised of small companies. So we have to figure out when we're thinking about the workforce how we could potentially use badges that would transcend just a particular industry, something that can be cross-sectional. And so we're going to be tapping into all of the resources, including what we have in the district.
Fantastic. So with that, we are now going to transition to our question and answer portion of the program. And I believe we have a first question from Leslie Beller from MHA Labs. Yeah. You're good? Okay. So does anyone, we have one over there. Okay, great. Sure.
Experience. My mother's a first grade teacher, and one thing I'm concerned about statistically is what percentage of people who actually enroll in the Badger program actually are completers if you have that data, number one, in Chicago in particular. And then number two, I guess one thing, it isn't a concern, but we did talk about soft skills, and we implied that soft skills are critical in terms of being successful in the workforce, especially at a place like IBM. And the way that I translate that is into culture, corporate culture. So, you could have people like this on your screen who do very well and pass the badges and do very excellent, but how do you actually measure, if I can say in a polite way, how well they're going to fit into your culture?
Do you want to answer the first part, or?
I think he asked Chicago.
Is that for me for the?
How well the badging is going into.
You want to go, David? That's fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's a big problem. It really is. Because I think that, and there's another area that we could do a better job of assessing people to determine, are they a candidate for a large company like IBM, 400,000 employees? It's not easy to navigate a company with 400,000 employees versus maybe working at a smaller company or doing a startup. So you're absolutely right. It's something that is difficult. People typically end up learning on the job and then they leave if they don't make it. But I was at a seminar last November where I was talking about how colleges and high schools prepare people for the workforce. And questions came up like, we don't even know how to explain to people how they hold a meeting at a company like IBM. How do you define what the objectives are? Who should be the stakeholders? What are the outcomes going to be? The things that I kind of take for granted now, obviously, after being in there. So I think that there's a big, big problem understanding the culture of a large corporation like IBM, a smaller company, and maybe it's a better fit to work for a smaller company. It's much more nimble and it's a little easier. You have to be relatively political to work at a large company because you have to know where there are a lot of closed doors at a company like IBM. You have to find the open door. So it's a challenge, and I'm not sure how you catalog that, but certainly colleges have to do a better job trying to speak the same languages that companies have, and maybe badges can help with that.
Sorry, any of our other panelists want to weigh in?
Oh, well, just to jump in, I mean, it's a really great question, and I would say that having worked with many colleges around the country, and then in my current college where we really are so explicitly focused on this connection with industry, our students are 70% are first generation going to college. A lot of these folks are really in basically dead-end jobs, and without this, most of our students are adult workers, incumbent workers, but we do have a bunch that are school age as well. But the point being that they are advancing, and they finish our programs, and 50% of them within 90 days of graduating are getting promoted, and a lot of it is because they're working on quote soft skills that their employers have said are really important that maybe no one's even bothered, they haven't even thought about or ever thought about in the context of their work. So I do think there are inroads that can be made. We're not just working with big employers like IBM. We're working with large, medium, small.
And I'll just address two things we're doing. We've got our data scientists working on almost a Wikipedia of the interest, so that you put in what you're interested in, whether it's yoga, gardening, running, and it's trying to pull jobs that require some of the same. I mean, if you like to hike, run, and fish, you probably don't want to work at IBM. No, just kidding. I mean, you probably want to be outside, so we're inferring, we've got data scientists working on that. So the culture, we believe, especially with this next generation, they are not going to do what these previous generations did. So we're definitely working on interest surveys. And then the point about incumbents, we're doing a lot of work with incumbents. So we have over 5,000 retail workers that are entry level that we just surveyed in Dallas to understand, do they want to be promoted? Do they want to be a store manager? If they don't want to be a store manager, what is their interest? Do they want to work at AT&T? Do they want to work in sales? Trying to infer from some of the data, where do people want to go based on their own desires? So a lot of it is this next generation, they'd rather make less and enjoy what they're doing.
So we've got a question from Peter Gutmacher there, and then we'll go to a question from online.
Hi, I have an education question for Julian. I'm Peter Gutmacher with the District of Learning team that's working with Deborah. So As far as the value of badging for colleges, in the preliminary conversations that we've had in DC with the college community, we've framed a lot of things in benefits around developmental courses. So there are skill sets that young people often lack coming into their first year of college that cause them to go into developmental courses that are almost an assurance of them dropping out. And even though there's movement in that in general in DC for those to run concurrently with regular courses, the power of the community to help build those skills in young people so that when they get to college, that they're in place, seems like a good a good asset for the college community. And the other thing that strikes me is that young people often come to their first year of college not knowing how to really navigate the structure of the university itself. And so it could behoove universities everywhere to really create their own badges that take young people through the process of how to navigate and tap resources and services that those colleges provide. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just sort of see the badges as kind of like little smaller and smaller pieces of what we're already doing with degrees and certificates and soon micro-credentials. And so, number one, yes, so long as what they're being badged in kind of ties to something that ultimately is going to help them get a better job. But I also think that really important too, and we see this with our adult students as well as our young students, that getting those badges, especially for kids who maybe haven't had the greatest experience in school or haven't been in the greatest schools, that having those little victories is extremely important. And our students are not looking for college. It's usually their employers that are coming to them and saying, hey, here's this opportunity for you. And it's those little victories that get them going, and those can all be badged.
Great. So we're going to attempt to address this question from online. This is from Dr. Prudhomme from the Interactivity Foundation, which is related to whether participants could share any guidance for setting up a badging program. For example, are there any common guidelines about setting up and mapping out a stepped or graduated system for accrediting skill development? David, I'm not sure if you want to address that one.
Well, back to that SlideShare thing that I mentioned, because I do have charts in the back on that. You go to SlideShare, IBM, badge, and I'm pushing LinkedIn's products, but no, there's a checklist for it. But there is an absolute way you have to do it, and you do have to. From my perspective at IBM, I had to start with a very small core group of people, 4 people at the most. Committees just don't work when you're coming up with something like this if you want to do something very quickly. So I worked with a group of about 4 people. In our case, we engaged an expert. We went to Pearson VUE. We did a buy versus build decision on it to decide were we going to just take the open source content and do it, or we're going to go to something like Badger. It made sense for us to go to Pearson VUE for what we were doing. So I would look for an expert to try and help you with the best practices on it. That helped us tremendously on it. Communication is absolutely key. We found that when we started issuing badges, and we did it small, we did a pilot with a small group of activities, 7 activities at IBM. But the communication out of the badges, I think, is extremely important. When you're sending the badge out to somebody, when somebody's earned the badge, you need to send them a communication letter that tells them what's in it for them. Because if you don't make it very, very clear, they're not going to claim the badge. Claim rates we have are very, very high. They're around 65, 70%. In our industry, they're around 33%, and across the board, they're probably closer to 5 or 6%. So they're very, very high, but we articulate the value, what's in it for you. And I think that back to that, the last point on that is you have to, up front, determine what the value proposition is for the badge issuer, the badge earner, and then the badge consumer. You better be very, very clear on what those benefits are, because everybody's going to be asking you, what's in it for me?
Yeah. So I believe we've got a question from Bob Lerman there.
Hi, I'm Bob Lerman from Urban Institute. I have 2 concerns about the badge movement. Not that I'm against it, but one is the segmentation of occupational competence and the idea that in some fields anyway, you're part of a community of practice when you complete some sort of occupational competency, like let's say being a fireman or something. Second concern that I have has to do with the very limited amount of work-based learning and the fact that, even in the soft skills area, let's say you need responsibility. but the responsibility you need to mow somebody's lawn every 2 weeks might be different from the responsibility if you're in a nuclear power plant. So, you know, a lot of these things are in the context of what your career is, what your occupation is, what your type, size of firm, and that sort of thing. And I'm concerned that this is a kind of shortcut to having kind of real, in-depth work experience leading to some sort of a valued certification with even a a graduation. So
You've got people chomping at the bit.
I have a viewpoint on that because I don't agree. But I do agree with a couple of things you said. I think that there are certain jobs that are going to require that have security, right? There are certain jobs that absolutely require a legally defensible, psychometrically sound type of certification or something behind it. There's no question that there are going to be jobs that require that. You don't want somebody coming in and breaking your system or doing something that's dangerous. So there's absolutely a need for that. But I think what badges does is it breaks down a larger credential into its parts. And if I look at, a lot of people in this room have gone to college, but you can tell me you went to Pepperdine University or you went to Harvard or wherever you went. I don't know specifically what makes you tick. And if I knew at that level of not just even the class level, but at the capabilities or the experience levels that you had when you were doing any of these activities, starting in high school or before that even, I'd have a better understanding of who you are. So I think that breaking down people's skills, capabilities, and interests at that micro level is going to be very, very valuable. I think it's all going to shake out. There's no question about it. The transparency in the badges is critical, that you can see exactly what that person earned the badge for. But we're also finding that with our professional certifications, that the people that get badges increase their certification benefit. And we're also finding that the test takers on our certifications have increased. People who have earned badges increase their capabilities and their ability to pass the certification by 56%.
I know that Deborah wanted to wait.
Well, I just wanted to add, the badges are really not intended to replace work-based learning. I don't think anyone in this room believes that anyone could potentially get a job without having some level of work experience. I think that's oftentimes what's separating someone, particularly youth, where they haven't had an opportunity because they're not in a structured classroom in order to get that work-based learning. What the badges do is round out the individual. It tells an employer what their interests are. It tells an employer those amorphous skills that you really can't see during an interview. It gives them an idea of what that looks like. It also tells an employer that they're self-directed and that they're goal-oriented, things that you can say, but this is a way of demonstrating it in a very real way, so that an employer, when they're looking at that individual, and as you teach youth how to market those badges, you're essentially letting an employer know, I'm worth the risk because I'm willing to learn, because I have this backpack of badges behind me that ranges from the particular skills of an employer to, ecology, or knowing about the ecosystem, or understanding space travel, or whatever the range of badges are that the person has in their backpack. I think the other thing is that it's really designed to fill gaps, right? So in our work, what we're trying to do is round out a person's resume. You identify what those skills are that they have from their prior work experience, and then you take what their career goals are, you look at the skills and competencies that are needed for that particular career goal, and you figure out what needs skill training, and you get that, and then what needs some other type of demonstrated skill that will help to round out their resume so that they look more competitive when they're competing against other people with work experience. And so that's really the nuance. It's a distinction that is necessary when you've got so many people competing for the same jobs.
So we're going to go to one question online, and then I think we have two more questions in the audience that we'll get to before we wrapped up. So this is from Matt from the Sprout Fund in Pittsburgh, who says that connected learning tells us that when learning is built on a youth's passion is the most profound. What are the inherent challenges faced by providers and employers in applying this particular insight to today's workforce development landscape? Are soft skills the only avenue for leveraging passion and purpose? I'm going to restrict this one to Jamai here.
Passion and purpose. So again, I think I really like how you talked about rounding someone out. I think the badges, passion and purpose, are definitely this next generation. Again, they want to be doing something because they like it and it means something to them. And they get paid for it, right? So I think that to me, the badging will create opportunities that you will be able to understand someone's passion, because they're going to start getting badges based on their interest. A coder is going to keep getting badges that's around programming. So I do believe that the badges can start replacing this antiquated resume, which isn't telling the employer anything. The resume is not saying anything except where you worked before, which you may have hated, and what degree you got or formal education. So if I was an employer, if I was interviewing someone, then it says, what are your interests? And you put 3 things: running, cooking, and cleaning. Or why I say cleaning, I don't know. But I think that the badging will start opening up new ways to find talent, because you'll see, where did it steer this person? And I want to reiterate what I heard earlier. We got to be careful the badging is not just for opportunity youth. Because as soon as it's just for an opportunity youth, it'll be tagged that. So I think badging should be for programmers, computer people. We're working in Salt Lake City to get a lot of different IT badges or credentials for folks. So I think it's really important that we look at passion and purpose for all workers to assure that the connect is made.
So we've got a question from the mayor here, and then we'll probably do one more question right there.
Hi, I'm Christopher Cabaldon. I'm the mayor of West Sacramento, which is one of the new LRNG cities, and I chair the Jobs, Education, and Workforce Committee for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, for which badging is a critical priority. I'm curious as to your reaction to Shayne's finding. It picks up on the point that you just made with respect to the GED language effect. I think every single one of you mentioned that college wasn't for everybody, that you don't need to go to college. And our polling, at least in California, focus groups with folks in California, is that language is a very, very powerful dog whistle around this is for other people's kids. And for Vietnamese or Latino immigrant families, it is, this is a thing that will divert my precious daughter from becoming the first attorney in our family ever. So I'm just curious, is this language that we're pulling in, I think partly from the vocational education world, how does that reconcile with what Shayne said about the way that we're framing the work that we're doing?
I'm going to point Julian to answer that question.
Yeah,
if that's okay.
no, I don't say that. Because I look at the data and I still see a very high correlation between post-secondary credentialing, not necessarily a 4-year degree. And that's what Jamai is saying. I just think the issue is more that employers have this kind of like, many employers, not IBM, and many employers have this sort of, they're not very good at understanding the competencies needed to do jobs in their companies. So they have these like boilerplate, like the jobs. I was just talking to we're doing some work with like one of the major transportation systems in the country. And they said their job descriptions were designed in the 40s. And like they're basically the same jobs. And so I think the problem is that there's this, that what's, people do need post-secondary, number one. And number two, it's just that there's like lots of different kinds and some's better than others. And maybe a badge here can get you on a path to something that will be bigger. But one of the things I think the millennials get, and you were kind of alluding to this, Jamai, is that we have not much but our skills to just kind of take with us from one job to another, because we're all going to be contractors and jobs are kind of going away. So I think the idea that college degrees don't matter, employers still are very much focused on, most of the good career track jobs require some kind of post-secondary. And we just have to figure out how to get there, whether it's in little bits and bytes that add up to it or the degrees themselves.
Okay, we still have our last question right here. And please identify yourself.
My name is Andy. I'm with Drexel University in the Digital On-Ramps project. We're heading up the LRNG Philly project. So my question is around badge validation, because validating badges becomes very important. You want consistency and you want quality validation behind these badges if you want employers to respect them. We're working with our summer youth employment group as well, Philadelphia Youth Network, and their Work Ready project. We have 20,000 youth that apply for jobs every year and about 8,000 to 9,000 that get them over the summer. how do you handle validation for work readiness badges or workforce development badges with that scale with limited staff, and make sure that the validation is quality as well? So that it's kind of a key question. I'm curious how people are handling it.
You want to go ahead
Well,
and try and tackle that one?
I'll just say really quickly that I think I applaud the summer youth programs, but I think it has to be long-term, full-time employment. You can't really validate someone's efficacy from a research point. I mean, you can say they did good on the job for the summer, but we're working with employers for 6 months and beyond. So all of the validation studies we're doing are for full-time employment. I do think that there's many employers willing to do validation studies, and we've got 4 in the line right now to do them. So I think we have to continue to have employers like IBM willing to do some type of badging, do some validation that supports that.
Okay. Well, I think that we've reached the end of our tape here. And I want to, first of all, thank our esteemed presenters, and as well as our panelists for providing such meaty ideas for the field, businesses, and policymakers to consider. All registrants for this event will receive a thank you with the opportunity to receive a link to our digital badges research paper authored by Shayne Spaulding and Martha Johnson, an opportunity to subscribe to Urban's Beyond High School newsletter, and learn more about upcoming events hosted by the Urban Institute through #LiveAtUrban. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let me just thank Don Baylor for organizing this panel, and just a few other folks at Urban. It's a large team. We have Kristen Durham and Jake Cowan and Martha Johnson and Shayne and Don, who really led this event. So please just join me in thanking the Urban team.